Hi, this is a quick video that covers some ground about giving you some information and tips about your speaking exam or oral exam for the IBDP language B. So let's get cracking and have a look at what, first of all, does that consist of. So we're going to start off with the standard oral exam at the standard level, and this is the outline of what the examination tells us about, which we have a 15-minute presentation time where you are giving a photo, a visual stimuli, and then you've got sometimes to choose between those two photos and prepare a presentation which should last about 3 to 4 minutes when the examiner comes to talk to you or your teacher. The teacher engaged the student on the theme. So basically you do your presentation, and after that, what you are doing is basically debriefing about questions about the topic that you have covered in the card itself. Okay, the teacher engages then in a general discussion, which will be covering or talking about one different theme given from the course. So the most important aspects they are that you consider doing all those things there on the side. So communicate clearly, effectively, and I would stretch the idea that you need to deal with a variety of purpose. Understand that appropriate language is important, and you need to stretch the intercultural aspect. Then you also have to express ideas fluently and accurately in the language, which is sometimes a difficulty. Okay, sorry about that. So then you also need to reflect and give a range of opinions about yourself and be able to talk about the topics that you've covered in lesson, because after all, this is an exam that is recapping all the things that you've done in a 2-year period. Now, let's talk about the mark scheme and let's have a look at how you will be assessed in your language B course. So this could be English, Spanish, German, and many other languages, such as French for me. So what you will see is that if you analyze and read all this, then you will see there's a couple of strands coming out. And among those strands, there is, I think, a list of things that you can think about or read between the lines about. And those are things that are important to the examiner. So if you look, there is numerous mention about learning vocabulary based on the topics. And also, there's another category of vocabulary you need to know is the vocabulary that you can recycle, basically that you can use with any photos. So we're going to review those things, and then we're going to talk about potential solutions where we can apply those two. So number 3, there is an emphasis about using complex language and also making mistakes. What I find useful to know is also that despite that there is an emphasis on complex structures here at the bottom, sorry about the little slides issue, then you can see that you can still make mistake and still get basically a top mark. Okay, so don't be phased about this. Then the thing that often puzzles students is complex structures, and what is especially a complex structure. A complex structure is, for example, in French, it's about using the variety of the tenses that you have, potentially the subjunctive and more tricky grammatical aspects. So if you think about English, that could be about using C clauses. It could be also if or compound clauses, conjunctions within sentences, and relative pronouns, which are fairly complex sometimes in some languages. So complex structures are this, not including also sometimes talk about idiomatic structures on how you can sound like French, and we're going to come back to this. Also, remember, number 4 is that you can correct yourself. Even though you're allowed to make mistakes, then you can correct yourself and you will not be penalized for the mistakes that you make. So make sense. Also, One of the mistakes that I've come across the most in the number of years that I've been doing this, about 8 years, is that often students, when they get stressed, they start talking about nonsense, basically. And that is usually due to a lack of practice in advance. And they, during the exam, look at me and feel very sorry that actually they can't answer, or they think they kind of got an element of answer, and then we never really quite get there. So what I would say is that to the students that happens, and I would give some advice, is that you really need to rehearse, but we're going to come back to that. Practice intonation versus pronunciation. It's important that we understand this. Intonation is the sound, the music of the language, if you think. Whereas pronunciation, in my view, is more related to the sounds within the words or the word. Okay, so intonation is the whole sentence. How do you sound French? Okay, so like in English right now, I'm having a rising intonation. But pronunciation is perhaps my French pronunciation sounds a little bit like that now, but my intonation is suitable for the language I'm trying to speak, which is English at the moment. Okay, so these two distinctions are quite important. I would give the following advice. You need to make vocab sets or vocab lists, or make notes during lessons about the vocab that is important for the topics. So, for example, on the topic of sharing the planet, how do you say greenhouse effect in the language that you're going to sit your exam in? Okay, make sets of vocab. You could use, for example, tools like Quizlet.com, where you can find some Quizlets that are already full of connectives, and you can learn about how to logically articulate your language. Okay, so it's things like using however, nonetheless, nevertheless, furthermore, first of all. So if you know those things in other languages, they will really help you to move forward, because they help you to signpost your language. What do I mean by polish your grammar? Nothing about Poland there, but polish your grammar means that your grammar needs to be pretty neat if you want to be able to score highly in that language criteria. And why is that? Well, it is because you've got to use varied and complex structures, and usually complex structures requires a deep understanding about those. Prepare your ideas, and I know it's going to seem silly because you're not supposed to have seen the photo card, and then why am I asking you to prepare for those, or why am I telling you to do that as a tip? Well, in fact, remember what I said a couple of minutes ago. It is a course that is based on a 2-year length. So everything that you do in just 2 years, then you really need to review and make notes when you are doing the course, so you can prepare your ideas or review your ideas or revise your ideas. But if you haven't made notes in the first place, then it's very difficult for you to review what were the important ideas that you talked about in class. And then the final about rehearsing in relation to language, you know that your brain learns by strengthening the pathways that are getting used more and more. So the more you say and more you reuse something, the easiest it gets. So for example, the first time you've described a photo, you may have found it very difficult, but as soon as you've learned the language to be able to describe the photo through making a vocab set about describing photos, then you can then make it very easy through rehearsing how to rehearse various different photos. So that was my advice for criteria A, the language, for the speaking exam. Now let's move to criteria B, which is not language, actually, it is message. Sorry, apologies about the little typo there. So I've done the same here. We've got the mark scheme here provided by the IB diploma, and I've tried to extract the key themes, key aspects that we need to be able to deal with. So the first one is about describing the photo. You need to be able to describe the photo. As you can see, it says irrelevant to the stimulus, and here it says relevant to the stimulus. So what you're saying about the photo, it needs to be about the photo, not about anything you've done about the topic that you've done about the photo. Okay. You need to also link it with the target culture, meaning that if you're sitting a French exam, you need to mention about something about someone that speaks French. Watch out, it could be about France, but it could also be about any place that speaks French. So it could be about Switzerland, Belgium, Canada, even some parts of India used to speak French. So it could be about there as well. Okay, not to mention Africa. So link it with the target cultures there. Link it with the topics and ideas that you've seen in class, because it's absolutely crucial, and meaning that you're demonstrating to the examiner that's who is listening to your exam, not the person sitting down with you doing the exam, but you're to the examiner, the person marking the exam. You're demonstrating to him that you really understand, or you have really sat the course and you really know what you've talked about in the last 2 years. So you need to be able to demonstrate and show that off. Finally, you need to also give opinions, because it says about broad, and responses are broad in scope and depth and personal interpretation. So that means you need to give your opinions, and you also need to show that you know your stuff. And finally, you also need to engage the interlocutor, which means you need to answer in details. And finally, lead the conversation, I would say, is one of the most important aspects. You need to give the feeling to the examiner that you are in charge, not the teacher, in terms of you doing most of the talking. The teacher is not there to guide you. They are here to help you, essentially, but they are not. Yeah, and you'll see that as soon as you take that lead, then things will follow. Those are then my advice of what you could do in order to be able to become proficient about your photo. So review photo description skills. You need to know how to describe a photo, because that's absolutely crucial. Review questions and ideas from the class. We've already kind of mentioned this. And learn opinions and connectives, and train yourself to try to use them as much as possible. Then we're not talking about grammar here, but we're talking about also articulating your things. So within the first couple of seconds of your speaking, for example, you could decide by saying, first of all, in my photo, we can see that the photo is about the topic of blah, blah, blah. And now I'm going to describe the photo for you. Okay, so that if you said that in English, in your English exam, you probably would set the scene quite well for the examiner to follow you. Okay, and that's what we need by taking the lead in a way. Revise speaking for 4 minutes, remember, and then that is followed by a conversation, and then it's also followed by the conversation about the other topic. Finally, criteria C, sorry about the mistake again on my presentation there. So interactive skills and communication. So here I've done exactly the same. It's a little bit simpler. It's out of 6, so not so many marks about that. Demonstrate that you understand and have some ideas about the question, because that means that you can provide a response in target language, and demonstrate comprehension, so that you understand what the question is about, and you're also contribute with own ideas and class in work. So for example, if you worked on a text in class when talking about global warming and other current issues, then you could be bringing those arguments back, those key problems that you've analyzed in class, and the controversial aspects of why do some people agree, why do some people not agree with this, and what can people not find an agreement on this. So then my general tips would be to take notes during lessons and make sure that those notes are user-friendly. You can look at online how to take notes efficiently in lessons. There's lots of YouTube videos about this. Make a list of questions is for me a very good way to do that. So I do that with my students particularly, and I make them prepare a list of questions that they think could come up in the speaking exam when we are doing some revisions. And they try to answer those questions themselves. And by answering those questions in a little booklet, then they will find very, very quickly something to talk about if they get a photo on a topic that we've seen in class. And remember, your teacher is not here to trick you. So they would probably put something in as a photo that is something you can talk about. Prepare your answers and have them checked in advance. So once you've made those questions, you need to answer them. For example, you could say, are you for or against gay marriage? And what do people think about gay marriage in France? So those could be your 2 questions that you could start answering, and try to have the pros and cons and try to be objective and demonstrate to the examiners you've got those critical skills that the IB talks about very often. Then you also need to be able to rehearse, because communication and interactive skills is about interacting with the examiner. So do you just answer the question, or are you answering the questions with adding extra bits? If you're adding extra bits, that really helps for you to be doing the rest. So that concludes my series of things that you could be doing for your speaking exam. And remember that it is, all in all, 15 minutes of preparation, 8 minutes on the photo and the theme of the photo, plus 5 to 6 minutes on another theme. So the themes that you can define are theme 1, identity; theme 2, experiences; theme 3, it's running out of my head. Theme 3 is human ingenuity; theme 4, social organization; and theme 5, sharing the planet. Okay, so this concludes this. If you've got any questions, write them down below. This is where you can find also a list below of a forum you can join if you want, or if you're interested, and a website that you can find some resources for your IB speaking exam.